"Get out of my event. You don't belong here. Take your charity case coat and go back to wherever it is people like you come from." She didn't answer. She just looked at him the way you look at something that doesn't know what it is yet. 2 minutes later, a black SUV pulled up to the front entrance of the Harrington Club. The man who stepped out of it was about to make Clifford Beaumont understand, in front of every business partner he'd spent 30 years cultivating, exactly what he had just done. Nobody in that room saw it coming. That was the whole point. 3 hours earlier, the evening looked nothing like a disaster. The Harrington Club sat on the edge of downtown Toronto, all polished oak and leaded glass. The kind of place that had been old before most of its members were born. A fundraising gala for the Beaumont Foundation's new children's hospital wing. 300 guests in black tie. A jazz quartet in the corner doing something tasteful with Coltrane. The kind of night where people wrote checks with a lot of zeros and felt good about themselves until morning. Lena arrived alone. She wore a navy wool coat over a plain dark dress, sensible flat shoes, no jewelry except a thin watch she'd had for 15 years. Her hair was natural, pulled back simply. She looked to every person who noticed her at all, like someone who had walked in from the wrong door. A guest's assistant, maybe. Someone from the catering company who'd forgotten her uniform. She didn't correct anyone. At the coat check, the young woman behind the counter fumbled with the tickets, clearly new and flustered by the line building behind her. Lena waited. When she reached the counter, she helped the woman sort the ticket roll without being asked, showed her the trick with the perforations so they wouldn't jam, and smiled. "You've got it now," Lena said. "You'll be fine." The woman exhaled like she'd been holding it since her shift started. Lena knew the parking attendant's name. She'd learned it on her way in when his badge caught the light. She asked him about the weather forecast because he'd been standing outside in it all night. She tipped both of them more than any of the 300 guests in silk and cufflinks would tip all evening. Neither of them knew who she was. She had her reasons for that. Lena's husband had insisted she come tonight. His name was Conrad and he was the single largest private donor to Beaumont Children's Research in the country. He had called her from Vancouver that afternoon, a board meeting running long, and made her promise she'd attend in his place. That she'd look around, tell him what the new wing was going to look like. She had laughed and said she'd try not to embarrass him. He had said, with the absolute certainty of a man who had been married to her for 22 years, that was not possible. So Lena had driven herself. She had not called ahead. She had worn the coat she liked and the shoes that didn't hurt, and she had not told anyone at the door who her husband was. She wanted to see the event the way it actually was, not the way they dressed it up for a donor's wife. Conrad would have laughed at that too. He always said she was the one who noticed things. Inside, she moved through the room quietly, listening. The conversation was cheerful and loud and almost entirely about money. A developer bragged about a condo project in the annex. A hedge fund manager explained his last quarter to a woman who did not look interested. Near the silent auction tables, two women in matching statement necklaces discussed whether the hospital wing would be named properly, meaning whether the lettering on the building would be large enough to read from the street. Lena paused at the children's art installation near the east wall, drawings from the hospital's pediatric ward, crayon and marker on paper framed and lit simply. She stood in front of one for a long time. A girl named Maggie, age 7, had drawn herself with a doctor and a very large orange cat, underneath it in careful block letters. "The cat is my idea." Lena smiled for a long time at that one. Behind her, the room kept talking about money. She found the table assignments board and located her seat. Table 14. She was walking toward it when a hand came down on her arm. Not gently, "Excuse me." The voice belonged to a man who had clearly decided something before he'd finished his sentence. He was tall, silver-haired, wearing a tuxedo that fit the way only custom fit, and carrying the specific expression of someone who manages rooms for a living and considers that a form of virtue. Clifford Beaumont. She recognized him, of course. Founder of the Beaumont Group, host of this evening, the name on the wing they were all here to fund. He did not recognize her. "Yes?" Lena said. "Can I ask who you're with tonight?" His tone was the kind of polite that isn't. "I'm here as a guest," she said. Beaumont looked her over once, the coat, the shoes, the absence of jewelry. "A guest of whom, exactly?" Lena met his eyes. "My husband sends his regrets. He's in Vancouver." Your husband, Conrad O.C. Nothing on Beaumont's face shifted. The name meant nothing to him in this context, attached to this woman, in this coat. I see, he said. And your husband is a member here? He's a donor, Lena said. Beaumont's smile was patient in the way that means the opposite. We have a great many donors, he said, some of them quite generous. But this is a private event, and the guest list is, he paused, curated. He looked past her shoulder toward a man in a gray suit near the entrance. That was Malcolm Reed, his events director. Malcolm, could you? I'm on the list, Lena said simply. If you were on the list, Beaumont said, we'd know who you are. He said it with the absolute conviction of a man who has never once been wrong about what someone's shoes meant. A few guests nearby had started to listen. Beaumont noticed, and it didn't make him quieter. I'm going to be honest with you, he said, because I think that's kinder than the alternative. Events like this have a certain, he searched for the word, standard. Not everyone is comfortable in that environment, and that's perfectly fine. He smiled again, that same pshent smile. The staff entrance is around the side. If there's been a mix-up with the catering roster, Malcolm can sort it out for you. The catering roster. A woman near the bar covered her mouth with her champagne glass. Lena looked at Clifford Beaumont for a long moment. The room had gone careful around them, that particular silence of people who want to watch without appearing to watch. Mr. Beaumont, she said, my name is Lena Osei. I'm seated at table 14. I would like to look at the children's drawings for a few more minutes, and then I would like to find my seat. Beaumont's smile held, but something behind it flickered. I don't have a Lena Osei on my list, he said. That's a clerical error, she said. I don't make clerical errors, he said. The room got quieter. Malcolm Reed had arrived at Beaumont's shoulder, tablet in hand, looking like a man already calculating how bad this was going to be. He pulled up the guest list, scrolled again. Sir, he said quietly, she is on the list. Beaumont's jaw moved. How? She's listed under the Osei Foundation account, Conrad Osei's table. She looked at Lena, then back down at the tablet. He cleared his throat. She's listed as primary attendee. Beaumont waved his hand. She doesn't look like a primary attendee. And there it was, the thing underneath all the polite language, the patient smiles, the curated standard. He had decided what she was the moment he saw her, and no list, no name, no simple fact was going to move that decision, because the decision wasn't about facts. It was about what she looked like, and men like Clifford Beaumont had been deciding what things looked like for long enough that they had stopped noticing they were doing it. I'd like to stay and look at the children's art, Lena said again. I'm going to have to ask you to leave, Beaumont said. His voice had dropped to something lower, something meant to be final. I don't know who you are, and I don't have time tonight to sort out a list error. If you are who you say you are, you can speak to my office on Monday morning. There were people recording now. She could see the phones, held low along the sides, little screens catching the light. Mr. Beaumont, Lena said, I've asked twice to simply be left alone to look at the drawings, and I've told you twice, he said. This event is not for everyone. He said everyone the way other people say something worse. Her son-in-law, who was standing 8 feet away and had been watching this for 4 full minutes with his hands clenched at his sides, stepped forward. His name was Devon Asare, and he was 29 years old and had inherited exactly none of his mother-in-law's talent for staying quiet when things went wrong. That's enough, he said. Beaumont turned and looked at Devon with the expression of a man who has just been interrupted by furniture. Son, don't, Devon said. That's my mother-in-law. Whatever you think you're doing, stop. Your mother-in-law, Beaumont repeated, the same tone he'd used on the catering roster. Devon's voice was shaking, but he held it steady. You've been talking to her for 10 minutes in front of your entire donor base, like she wandered in off the street. She didn't. She's Conrad Osei's wife. She is the reason half this wing is getting built. He looked around the room, at the faces turned toward them. And you're doing this because of what she's wearing. The word landed hard. A murmur moved through the nearest cluster of guests. Beaumont's face went careful. I am doing no such thing. There has simply been a miscommunication. Malcolm, Devon said, not looking away from Beaumont. What's the total commitment from the Osei Foundation to this hospital project? Malcolm Reed stared at his tablet for a moment too long. Malcolm, Devon said again. Malcolm cleared his throat. Including pledges confirmed this quarter, he said, and his voice was very quiet. It's just under $4 million. The room held its breath. Beaumont's mouth opened. Devon looked at his mother-in-law. She had not moved. She was still standing exactly where she'd been standing, hands loose at her sides, watching Clifford Beaumont with an expression that was not angry and was not triumphant, and was somehow, because of that, worse than either. "You are going to apologize to her," Devon said to Beaumont. Beaumont's face had gone through several colors and landed on something between white and gray. Of course, there's been a misunderstanding I would never intend." "Devon," Lena said quietly, "it's all right. It's not all right." "Devon." Her voice was gentle. She put a hand briefly on his arm. "Let it go." He looked at her. The fury in him was still there, but underneath it something cracked, because he knew what she was doing, and he knew she was right, and he hated that she had to be right about this particular thing in this particular room. He stepped back. Beaumont, sensing a way out, began to compose himself. He straightened his jacket. He looked at Lena with the expression of a man preparing to be reasonable after being inconvenienced. "Mrs. O.C., if there has been any offense," the front doors opened. Not dramatically. The doors simply opened, the way they had been opening all night, and cold October air moved through the entrance hall, and a man came in. He was not tall. He was not young. He wore a plain dark overcoat and carried nothing and moved without hurrying through the room, the way water finds the lowest point. Not fast, not uncertain, just inevitable. He had the kind of face that takes a moment to place, the kind you recognize not because you've met it, but because you've seen it attached to words like decision and consequence. The room didn't react immediately. That took about 4 seconds. The 4 seconds ended when Catherine Dufresne, the director of development at the Beaumont Foundation, looked up from her phone across the room and said, out loud, to no one in particular, in a voice that carried, "Oh my God." The man kept walking. His eyes were moving across the room, cataloging. They found Lena in about 3 seconds, and when they did, something in his face that had been very still became something else. He reached her side. He stood next to her and looked at the room once, the way you look at something you've already decided about. "Lena," he said. "Hey, Dad," she said. The room processed this in approximately the time it takes for a champagne glass to tip off a table, that moment between it leaving the surface and anyone being able to do anything about it. The man's name was Roland Queasy. Most people in that room knew his name. Most people in that room knew his name the way you know the name of a weather system. Roland Queasy was the founder and chairman of Queasy Capital, which had, over the past 30 years, financed more infrastructure in Ontario than the provincial government in 4 of the last 8 years. He sat on the board of the Bank of Canada as an independent advisor. 3 weeks ago, his face had been on the cover of the Globe and Mail above a headline about the largest private endowment in the history of Canadian healthcare research. He was also, as it turned out, the person Clifford Beaumont had been trying to get a meeting with for 7 months. The calls. Beaumont's assistant had told him, "Just keep going to the same PA, and she says he's not available." Roland Queasy looked at Clifford Beaumont. Beaumont looked back at Roland Queasy. The room watched this happen. "I'm sorry," Roland said, and his voice was conversational, unhurried, the voice of a man who bills at a rate that makes rooms go quiet. "I didn't get here earlier. My flight was delayed." He looked at Lena. "Did I miss much?" Lena's expression was mild. "Not really." He looked at Devon. "You all right?" Devon said nothing. His jaw was doing something complicated. Roland turned back to Clifford Beaumont. Beaumont's smile appeared, the large, important one, the one he'd been rehearsing for this conversation for 7 months. "Mr. Queasy," he said, stepping forward with his hand out. "What an extraordinary! I had no idea you were." Roland looked at the hand for a moment before he took it. "You didn't know I was coming," Roland said. "That's right. I don't usually announce myself." He shook Beaumont's hand once professionally and released it. "I prefer to see things as they are," Roland said. He gestured mildly toward where Lena was standing. "I understand you've been speaking with my daughter." Beaumont's smile held. "Of course, yes, there was a small confusion with the guest list, which has been completely sorted." Roland tilted his head. Not quite a nod. "Malcolm," Roland said, and Malcolm Reed, who had been trying to become invisible for the last 90 seconds, startled. "The guest list issue," Roland said. "Was there actually a problem with the list?" Malcolm looked at his tablet, then at Beaumont, then at his tablet. "No, sir," he said. "Mrs. O.C. was listed correctly from the start." Roland looked at Beaumont again. The temperature in the room adjusted. "I heard some of it from the entrance," Roland said. Your daughter has a carrying voice when she's upset, he said to Lena, nodding toward Devon. He didn't look angry. That was the thing about Roland Queasy that the people who knew him understood, and the people who didn't know him had trouble parsing. He never looked angry. He looked like a man doing arithmetic, quietly and without showing his work. Mr. Beaumont, he said, I came tonight because your foundation does good work. The pediatric research program is legitimate. The new wing is needed. He paused. I also came because my daughter told me about the drawings. He glanced at the children's art installation on the east wall, and something shifted briefly in his face. A private thing, there and gone. She said there was a drawing of a girl and an orange cat, he said, and she texted me a photo of it, and I thought, he stopped. Well, that's not relevant right now. He looked at Beaumont again. Here's what is, he said. I had a commitment in mind, something I've been considering since the Globe piece ran. Something in the range that would let you name the whole research center, not just the wing. He said it the way you say Tuesday, the whole center. The numbers we've been discussing internally were in his assistant, a woman who had materialized at his side at some point, murmured something. Yes, the 11 to 14 range. Million, not a ripple in his voice. The way you say $11 to $14 million when it is simply what it is. Beaumont made a sound. That, Roland continued, was what I came here to discuss. Whether I still want that conversation depends entirely on what you do in the next 60 seconds. The room had not breathed in some time. Beaumont turned to Lena. He opened his mouth. He was a man who had given thousands of speeches. He had thanked donors and charmed premiers and eulogized colleagues and delivered remarks in 4 languages at international conferences. He had never in his adult life been at a genuine loss for words, but he stood there now, in his own event, in front of 300 people and a jazz quartet that had quietly stopped playing, and the words that came out were, I was wrong. He said it plainly. Something in his face gave way. Not all of it, not everything, but enough. Mrs. Osei, he said, I made an assumption about you that was unjust. I said things I would not have said if I had known. He stopped. He heard himself and tried again. I said things I should not have said. To you or to anyone. I'm sorry. Lena looked at him for a moment. The room waited. Thank you, she said. She meant it. It was not warm, but it was genuine, and she gave it without condition, which was more than Clifford Beaumont had earned, and she gave it anyway, because that was the kind of person she was. Roland watched his daughter. He had that arithmetic expression again. Then he looked at Devon, who had tears in his eyes that he was managing with considerable effort. You did good, Roland said quietly. Devon laughed, a short, rough sound. She told me to stop. She always does, Roland said. You stop anyway. He clapped Devon once on the shoulder, something warm and brief. That's the right call every time. The rest of the evening was a different kind of event than it had started as. 300 people had been in that room. 300 phones had been in that room. By the time the jazz quartet found its way back into Coltrane, the video was already in 14 group chats and climbing. By midnight, it was trending on X under a phrase one quick-fingered account had coined in the first hour, the orange cat moment. Nobody who wasn't there could explain that part right away. They had to watch to the end. By morning, it had been seen 4 million times. The version that spread fastest was 47 seconds. Cut to the moment Beaumont said catering roster, then jumped to the moment Roland Queasy said 11 to 14 million, then landed on Beaumont's face. That face, for anyone who needed a definition of what it looks like when a man of consequence understands exactly what he has done, was available in freeze frame at timestamps that became small landmarks on the internet for the following week. The Beaumont Foundation's communications team released a statement by 9 in the morning. It was careful and correct, and nobody paid much attention to it because Roland Queasy had already made one comment, a single post, no elaboration. My daughter is the most decent person I know. She gets that from her mother. That was all. 17,000 shares by noon. The calls to the Beaumont Group started before the markets opened. 3 corporate partners asked for meetings. Not angry meetings, concerned meetings, the kind corporations request when they are calculating reputational exposure and trying to get ahead of a story that is already fully behind them. A pension fund that had pledged to the foundation, Gala sent a letter expressing that it would need to see the outcome of an internal review before renewing the pledge. The city councilor, who had been at the event and done nothing, issued a lengthy statement about the importance of inclusion. Nobody was particularly impressed by it, including, one sensed, the counselor. Clifford Beaumont spent the morning on calls with his board. By afternoon, the Beaumont Foundation had announced a full review of its event protocols and a new partnership with a diversity and inclusion consultancy, whose director, coincidentally, had been in the room the night before. The director had been one of the people who had not looked away. Beaumont sent Lena a letter, handwritten, delivered by courier to the OC Foundation's offices on Bay Street. It was longer than his public apology and more honest, and she read it once and put it away and did not discuss it. Conrad called from Vancouver. He had seen the video on his phone at 6 in the morning. His first sentence was, "I should have been there." Lena said, "You couldn't have known." Conrad said, "Dev." Lena said, "Devon was very Devon about it." There was a long pause, and then Conrad said, in the voice of a man who has been married for 22 years to someone he genuinely admires, "Are you okay?" She thought about it. She thought about the drawing on the wall. Maggie, age 7, the orange cat. She thought about the coat check woman's hands, how they'd steadied when she showed her the trick with the perforations. She thought about what it had felt like to stand in that room and be looked through, to be decided about, to be told that the standard was not for her, all while standing 3 feet from a drawing made by a 7-year-old in a hospital bed who did not know or care what anyone was wearing. "Yeah," she said. "I'm okay." "You never told them," Conrad said. "No," she said. "Why not?" "Because," she said, "the children's art was real. It didn't need my name on it to be worth looking at." Neither did I. Conrad didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said, "I'll be back Thursday." She said, "I know." He said, "Love you." She said, "I know that too." She hung up and looked out the window at the city, gray and wide and indifferent, and full of people moving through it, most of them not who anyone thought they were at first glance. The OC Foundation's pledge was confirmed the following week. Roland Quasey's commitment came through 10 days after that. The research center was renamed. The children's art installation from the Gala became a permanent feature of the new wing's entrance lobby, by request. All 43 drawings, including Maggie's. Devon never quite let it go. He brought it up at every family dinner for the following year, the look on Beaumont's face, the 47 seconds, the orange cat moment, until Lena told him, not unkindly, that he was enjoying it too much. He said, "Someone has to." She said, "Fair." Her father called on a Sunday afternoon, 3 months later. He asked how she was. She said, "Fine." He asked about Devon. She said, "Still Devon." He laughed. They talked about nothing important for 40 minutes. Before he hung up, he said, "You know what I keep thinking about?" She said, "What?" He said, "That drawing the cat." She smiled. "Me too," she said. He said, "The kid was right. It's a good idea." She agreed that it was. Here's the thing that stays with me. After thinking about this story, about what happened in that room and what happened after. What Clifford Beaumont did that night happens. Not always in a ballroom in front of 300 people. Not always with a jazz quartet and $11 to $14 million waiting in the balance. It happens in lobbies and offices and waiting rooms and ordinary evenings. Someone gets looked at and the decision is made before a word is spoken, before the coat check, before the name, before any of the things that are supposed to matter. Most of the time, no one is recording. Most of the time, there's no Roland Quasey walking through the door. Most of the time, the person standing where Lena stood just has to carry it home. So the question this story leaves me with isn't about the billionaire, or the apology, or the $14 million. It's about the 47 seconds in the middle, when 300 people stood in a room and watched it happen. How many of them would have said something if Devon hadn't? That's the question I want you to sit with tonight, and I'd genuinely like to know your answer. Drop it in the comments. Tell me what you would have done, and be honest, because the honest answers are the ones that matter. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you're new here, subscribe. We tell stories about the quiet ones, the ones who don't announce themselves, the ones who know every name in the room and never need anyone to know theirs. Because the most powerful person in any room is usually the one you didn't notice when they walked in.